What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Worst Favorite Record podcast, where I talk to guests about records that are bad, that they enjoy anyway. And today I am joined by a very special guest, Josh Verbantes, from my favorite Pittsburgh band of all time, Meeting of Important People. So a lot of the listeners and viewers of this channel, I would say less than 1% probably are from Pittsburgh. So before we jump into the subject at hand, I'd like to kind of expose you to them a little bit and talk about who you are and what you do. So my first exposure to you is probably, what year would that have been? 06-ish, maybe 5, 6?
Do you remember, was it a 3-piece band or a 4? I think it was 3-piece at the time, right?
Yeah, it was 3-piece band. I saw you in a record store, small record store in the Oakland neighborhood of Pittsburgh, called Brave New World. My cousin's band that I was hanging out with all the time was opening up for you guys. They were called The Road Less Traveled.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And your set that day blew me away. So,
well, I remember we had a couple different versions of that band. That band was called The U, and so I was probably 21 at the time, and that was kind of like my first time that I was in a band that started to get some kind of recognition beyond just our friends, like a punk rock band. I think by that time we'd done a label deal, like we'd signed a label deal, and it was it was a dramatic time because we were young. We were trying to navigate this world of figuring out what a record label deal meant. Were we going to get to record our first album, all that kind of stuff. So it feels like another life, man. I guess, that would have been probably early, maybe even 2004, man, 2004 or 5. And then after that, a lot of things happened. I was in a Pittsburgh band called Ohio, which grew pretty well regionally in 2006, 7, and 8. And then we started doing the band that you mentioned, Meeting of Important People, which is probably how a lot of these songs are best known. Some of the songs that you even saw back then as the U, we kind of redid, and they were on our first and second album as Meeting of Important People. And that band has also been mostly like a regional band in the Pittsburgh area. We did tour a little bit a decade ago. We had like a digital label deal at the beginning of the digital era when you were still downloading onto your devices, right? The iTunes store and stuff. And so, we've mostly existed as a regional kind of garage pop band. And we're now, 13 or 14 years into that band with our original lineup. Just like the best of friends, and we're actually about to record a new album which will be 20-year-old songs. It'll be a bunch of those old The U songs that never really came out properly. It was kind of like my first batch of songs that I was really excited about. So that'll be out, I think we're planning as a 2023 recording project, and we'll go to vinyl with it. And that's what we're up to. But we've had song placements. We almost broke nationally a couple times. We had a viral music video for a song called Brittany Lane in like 2009, which made it to like Gizmodo and all sorts of blogs that there were a number of things where it kind of looked like, oh, the band might sort of break nationally, and we never quite did. We had houses here and kids and stuff, so we mostly really did the opposite of what a lot of people do. We kind of focused more like being the Clarks or something, a band that was able to build an audience and kind of maintain it regionally. And we only perform a few times a year and try to keep it like a special occasion.
Yeah, so you guys just did the Thunderbird. It's sold out show, it looked like.
Yeah, it was almost sold out. With all the other bands and with the staff and stuff, it was at capacity. I think the actual sales were close to being sold out, so we're trying to word it as it was at capacity, but not technically sold out. Kind of like wrestling, right? If you're a WWE fan or something, it's always like, they gave away 4,000 tickets by radio station call-in,
Very cool, though. I found out that show was happening late, so I couldn't make it to it. Otherwise, I would have been there. I moved back recently, so I've been a little out of the loop.
Where were you in between? I mean, since we last saw each other many years ago, you lived out of state, or?
Well, yeah, my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, moved to Philly. We were there for 3 years, and then we were in Arlington, Virginia for 4 years.
Oh, cool. Yeah, my wife lived in Arlington, I think, for a very short time way back. Well, welcome back, man. What neighborhood are you comfortable saying to the
Sure.
Pittsburgh listeners what neighborhood you live in? Or
Yeah, as long as they're cool with not stalking me. Um,
yeah,
I'm in Mount Washington now, right on the edge of
awesome.
Allentown.
Cool, man. Welcome back. Yeah, that music store show. It's so funny because we'd been messaging about doing the podcast, and you brought up that show many years ago at this little record store. And a day later, another friend messaged me, "Hey, do you remember that music store that used to be on whatever that is, Atwood or something in Oakland, the Pitt campus?" And it was so weird because I hadn't thought about it in 17 or 18 years. And then like within 24 hours, two independent people were talking about that store. And yeah, crazy memories of being in your early 20s and playing a lot of DIY venues and record stores and all ages kind of places. It's the kind of thing that really only happens in those few years usually for people.
Yeah, so that record store, I think it bounced around a little bit, and it was on Atwood, but I think when I saw you, that was actually when it was on Bates. It was like,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
the major corner. That's exactly right. Yeah, the
yeah.
road that comes off of the parkway. I had also kind of stalked, we're Facebook friends now. Did you work at the Greensburg CD warehouse?
I
Did I
worked
say
at
that?
I worked at all of them. I started working at the West Mifflin one,
Wow.
which is where I met one of our two mutual friends on Facebook, Caleb.
Mm-hmm.
He would shop there, and I was like, oh, this dude has cool taste. So we started talking, became friends. But that store closed down. So then I ended up working at the Monroeville and Greensburg store, which were
Oh yeah.
owned by the same guy.
I grew up in Plum, and we're driving people crazy who don't live here. We're saying all these neighborhoods, but yeah, the Monroeville CD warehouse was my spot because there was a used instrument store right next to it called Music Go Rounder in the same plaza.
Yep.
So you could buy like a used cymbal and then walk 10 feet and buy a used copy of Oasis Be Here Now. It was a great shopping experience.
Yeah, I worked for those two stores from 2008 until I left in 2015. So I was there quite a
Wow.
while.
Well, the Greensburg one was huge. I bring that up because we have two little kids now. We were taking our kids out to like Idlewild or something on Route 30, and we passed the music. It's still there, the CD warehouse that's in Greensburg. And I remember that they used to do kind of DIY punk shows and stuff. That was a coveted venue when you were 19, 20. Try to get a gig at the Greensburg CD warehouse. Were you part of those kind of in-store shows? Like, did you have anything to do with booking them or?
By the time I got there, they had stopped doing the shows for insurance reasons, and like the
Yeah.
shows were getting out of hand, and people were not behaving. So the shows had stopped, but they had the stage still set up in the back. It was just like an empty back room.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a lot of stories. Allegedly, before they were anybody, they had a show cancellation in Pittsburgh, and Coheed and Cambria called the store and said,
Mm-hmm.
can we play there?" So there was this early Coheed show in the back
Yeah.
room of CD Warehouse.
Yeah, it was on people's radar. I was gonna say I was never in the cool club, man. I never got to play there. I would send demos and stuff and MySpace message or something. So I was gonna say if you were part of that review committee, I can't believe you guys never had us, but
I shut you
I
down.
don't know. Yeah,
I was
maybe
the
someday.
gatekeeper. All right. Well, let's shift gears into what we're here to talk about, and that is your choice of record. And I've been saying to all of the couple of guests that I've had so far at the beginning that there are a couple different types of records that work for the idea of this podcast. One would be a record that you can kind of say, like, I recognize that this is pretty bad, but there's something that I either find funny about it or I get some kind of ironic enjoyment from. It could be something that you legitimately love. Maybe you don't understand why other people don't get it. It could be like the worst record in someone's catalog. It could be, if your favorite Elvis Costello record's the Juliet Letters or something, that would work. So I'm just wondering, before we even say what we're talking about here, what kind of record is this for you?
Well, I think it covers two categories because it's almost like Moby Dick. They say that you should revisit great literature and it means something different to you, right? Every 10 years. And I mean that kind of unironically. we're going to talk about a Wesley Willis album, very much in line with the kind of punk and DIY record store underground shows that we opened discussing. In college, I discovered Wesley Willis as an artist, like a lot of people do, which is ironically laughing, probably laughing more at him than with him, and it being so bad it's good. But then years later, it's really funny, man. Not only does it hold such a special place in my heart, Wesley Willis's music, but this particular album that we're going to talk about, Greatest Hits Volume 1, I think it's unironically really good because it's direct, honest, communicative music. And so it kind of covers both of those for me, the kind of snarky, ironic, being a teenager and college aged, something that's, I enjoy it because it's so bad. And now years later, listening to it and thinking, to me, this is unironically pretty good art. It really is, like spoken word, intentionally humorous in places, really good stuff.
So we should probably back up a little bit and explain who Wesley Willis is to the unfamiliar. He was Chicago, right? I think he's from Chicago.
Yeah.
Born in 1963, diagnosed schizophrenic. Basically used a little keyboard, used the auto accompaniment setting, and just played the built-in tracks on the keyboard and did kind of like spoken word stuff over top. Eventually, he was signed to Jello Biafra's label, Alternative Tentacles, and kind of started to build a little bit of a following. And you had kind of mentioned in our messaging to each other that following was kind of a lot of people laughing at him, which is kind of really sad.
Man, it is. It's interesting to talk about in 2023 because from a 2023 lens, there is a lot to talk about with the Wesley Willis fandom. There would be a lot. You could write a dissertation on it. At the time, the initial disclaimers would be, I discovered Wesley Willis through like Napster, right? The late 90s, early 2000s was a time where there was file trading beginning to absolutely blow up, especially on college campuses where you'd go to college and you'd have like Ethernet, high-speed internet for the first time, where at your house still, you usually still had a dial-up, So for the first time in 2000, 2001, 2002, it was a wonderful tool for exploring all this kind of music that you would have never encountered before. Certainly that you wouldn't have paid $14 for one song that you knew about. As a teenager, you didn't have that kind of money. So whether or not it was completely detrimental to the music industry, which maybe it has been, aside, when you got to college, you were every day. I remember I would queue up like 30 different songs that I wanted to hear, songs that I knew from oldies radio, right? But I would never actually buy their greatest hits compilation. You'd go to class and you'd come back and maybe 15 or 20 of them would have downloaded in that time. And through that, I learned about Wesley Willis. And at first, yes, it was, Wesley was presented to me by, there were other kids in my dorm who knew about him. One kid actually from Philly had seen him live, I think that year or the year before. And I didn't know his race. I didn't know that he was a black man, right? And the rap on him was, oh, this is a homeless, like alcoholic guy or something like that. We really didn't know like the mental health angle to it at first. So it was just presented as, oh, this is silly. Somebody recorded this as a homeless guy who is using a little keyboard and recording these pretty outrageous songs, right? They're, if the listeners aren't familiar, you can do a Google search, but Wesley would record kind of singing. The choruses were usually singing, but songs about all kinds of stuff. Everything from like morality tales, like about how he would create characters and say like, I broke into your house and da 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 da, and then the police arrested me. These very kind of prosaic, off the wall songs that seemed to be intentionally funny. And it was only later that I began to learn about him having been diagnosed as a schizophrenic guy. And yeah, from a 2023 lens, there's a lot that you could say about all of this. But my initial fandom of Wesley was just that they were these weird, kitschy songs. They had profanity in them, right? So it's funny and interesting when you're a kid. And yeah, my friends and I would crowd around and listen to like literally hours of Wesley Willis songs because there was so much out there already in the early 2000s.
Yeah, so there's a ton of, if you look at his discography, there's a ton of albums. I don't know what they are exactly, if they're just like tapes that he made, CDs that he was passing around, very unofficial. And then when he signed to Alternative Tentacles, then I guess Jello put together these tracks. So it is a compilation. It's called Greatest Hits. None of these were were what you would traditionally call a hit.
No, and that's why it seems okay to discuss on the podcast, because it's not really like a greatest. It's not like the Eagles' greatest hits, Volume 1 or whatever. Yeah, Jello, I think, had learned about Wesley in the mid '90s. He was a street musician. Wesley was an artist too. He did these incredible line drawings. He would give away. He would sell at his shows, and he was mostly like an underground, kind of like a punk musician. And then yeah, Jello, I think, compiled some of Wesley had done like hardcore songs, like with a full band in Chicago, as well as many of these kind of solo keyboard songs that we're talking about. And so I think that was the first time that on a national scale you could get a Wesley album at like a Best Buy or something. I remember seeing a couple Wesley Willis albums at like Circuit City in those years. I think before that he had just, like you said, been burning CDs. It was like mixtape stuff. But I think he has like 40 albums if you count those kind of DIY albums as well.
So I was familiar with him. I kind of knew his story and had heard little snippets, but I never really listened to him. So this was my first time kind of digging into any of his stuff. And the thing I was most struck by is, I had that kind of idea, like this is just a crazy guy. But the thing that struck me most was how much self-awareness there is. And there's a lot. He's talking about like an outburst he had in an art store where he had like a schizophrenic attack and was yelling profanities, and they threw him out of the store. And he has like all this regret and shame, and he's talking about it. It's really, really affecting, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I say, as an adult now, being like almost 40, I think it's really valuable and honest art, man. Like I feel like we're not doing it justice. If a listener, you really have to, like, it's hard to describe what these songs are. They are kind of like rambling little keyboard songs where he's just playing the like ding, 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 like the backing track button. He can change the key. He can go up and down the keyboard, and he's kind of rapping over it. And they're kind of like monotone, him speaking stories, talking about himself, talking about imaginary characters, talking about beating up Batman. And then he sings the chorus, and he really goes for it, man. Like, in terms of when I say I think it's good art, he's wailing the choruses, he's singing them at full volume, he's fully committing. You can tell he believes what he's saying. And yeah, as time went on, we started to hear his songs that were clearly about having schizophrenia. It's almost like Wesley had like 10 different kinds of songs, right? He had like his police arresting somebody songs. He had songs about being schizophrenic. He had kind of like bestiality songs where he's saying like he's wishing ill will on his demons in the form of like suck a Bactrian camel off and all this stuff that is very clearly intentionally funny. I'm not saying that as a justification. I think from documentaries later, you would see that, yeah, Wesley was obviously self-aware enough to know that some of this stuff was intentionally funny, and that you are laughing with him. But the more we learned about his actual mental health issues, there was a documentary that came out in 2003 called Wesley Willis, the Daddy of Rock and Roll, where I distinctly remember my friends and I watching it and going, oh, all right, man, this isn't funny. Well, I understand now. They followed him around, showed his actual mental health struggles. Wesley had a really, really hard life, man. Like, uh, drug addict parents. I think he was one of 10 kids in Chicago. He definitely was homeless at multiple times. And as his songs detail, he would hear voices. He would be violent with people. People would be violent towards him, right? Because they didn't understand what was going on. So he had a really tough life.
So one thought I had listening to this is that it's kind of like a child bringing you a drawing to put on the fridge. Like, it's so unfiltered There's no he's not worrying about making it good. He's just making it and presenting it. And there's something really special about that. I don't think you hear that very often in music.
No, that's exactly right. That is what he's doing. And before he was signed to Jello Biafra's label, there had been years where Wesley was making these recordings and giving them. He clearly wanted to share this stuff with people. So in terms of the exploitive nature of it, I don't really know. It's almost like a question of, could Wesley consent to wanting people to hear his music? Could he consent to signing a record deal with Jello Biafra? Seems like he could, and he wanted people to hear his music, and he wanted to share, like you said, those very direct and honest feelings with the world. I actually saw him live twice. I saw him in Buffalo, I want to say, at a college in Buffalo in maybe 2002. And then I saw him again the following year in Rochester in upstate New York. And it's difficult because 50% of the audience was kind of like drunken frat guys, right? That were just like going as like a sideshow attraction and almost like heckling Wesley. And then the other 50%, I think, genuinely saw that this was a kind person who wanted to share music with them. And they were in on the joke with him, right? Obviously, Wesley Willis is writing songs about the chicken cow. He's discovered a new breed of creature called the chicken cow, and he describes what that is. He would write songs about beating the hell out of Batman, beating the hell out of Spider-Man, beating the hell out of Birdman, who I'm not exactly sure who that is. Man, they're great songs. When people, I'm trying to think, what would be like smart music from that era, like the Decemberists or something? What did people think of as being like?
Something like that, yeah.
And it's like, if
Decemberists are a good call.
Decemberists, something like that, you couldn't pay me money to listen to that versus Wesley. Like, to me, Wesley Willis is actual. It's not smart, quote unquote, but it's actually, like you said, honest music, man. Like pretty unfiltered music.
Yeah, you have said that it's legit art, and I agree with that statement. I think it's very legitimate art. Where I kind of get hung up, and maybe you can talk about how you feel about this as well, is listening to it as like for enjoyment, for like musical enjoyment. Like, where is this something that you would put on and like rock out to? Like, I can listen to it and say, wow, this is really, a special thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, and artistically I appreciate it, but I'm not going to throw it on at a party, certainly, or like, or really almost ever. I like to know that it exists, and I like that I have heard it, but how much actual musical enjoyment do you get from it? Because the record that we listened to, I would say half or maybe more is the same keyboard part that he's using. So I wonder what your thoughts are as far as like actual music and separating that from art and thinking of that as like a different thing.
Well, if I was going to be rockist about it, where being who I am, the number one thing that I think about in songwriting is usually like melody, right? So it's probably not the kind of music that you listen to if you're looking for memorable melody, like traditional songwriting. But it's kind of like folk music in that it is honest lyrics, right? And they're memorable. To me, the biggest thing about music is it memorable? And absolutely, Wesley Willis music is extremely. How can you forget I whooped Batman's ass? Like, that's the greatest chorus I've ever heard. Or Rock and Roll McDonald's. Musically, I think it's more about the energy, which to me is, I love hip hop, but I'm usually not listening to hip hop for like melody. Sometimes the hook, right? If it's like Ashanti singing the hook or something, I'll think of that. That will cross over into that area of my brain. But to me, like hip hop is more energy, attitude, honesty, and you can frankly say much more in hip hop or in a Wesley Willis song because you're not beholden to a melody. You can cram in a bunch more syllables. You can literally say more things. So no, I probably don't listen casually to Wesley. It's also hard to put on an album like this because for every positive song that there is about he'd sing a song about a friend, you are my friend. Da, da. The next song will usually be about sucking a Bactrian camel's dick. So it's really hard to like play it through. There are peaks and valleys in terms of subject matter, and yeah, hard to put on at a party. That said, it made for a great experience in a dorm room when you're 19 or 20 and all your friends are gathering around. Hey, which Wesley Willis song did we download today? And absolutely loving it. I mean, Wesley Willis was, for better or worse, like party music for me for a year until we learned more about his background, what was going on with him.
So one thing I found really interesting, and I don't know if you know anything about this or not, or if you can say what's going on here, but there's this like, I don't know if it's an in joke or what it is, but there's this thing he does at the end of almost every song where he says, rock over London, rock on Chicago. And then he tags it with like a little
slogan,
a little slogan sponsorship thing. What's he doing there? Why is he doing that? And it's really interesting to me. I was like, what is going on with this?
Yeah, I mean, not being a doctor, I think a lot of what Wesley is doing is he's a neurodivergent dude, right? So it's a lot of repetition, right? Of repetition of subject matter, repetition of expression. Yeah, at the end of every Wesley Willis song, I think he probably felt like he had to give a shout out to a business or something. So many of them are, like you said, Michelob, it's the champagne of beers or whatever, like rock over London, rock on Chicago, and then he'd tag it with some sort of sponsorship. I think there was a later documentary that came out later in the 2000s after Wesley had died, which was called Wesley Willis's Joy Rides, and it's excellent. And I do think they explain a lot of that stuff in that documentary, so highly recommended. But yeah, I think it was kind of a repetitive trope that Wesley thought he had to tag every song with, maybe to get sponsorship, or just, I don't know. He's trying to cash in big,
Yeah. So we don't have to do a full track by track, but we could just kind of touch on some of the ones that stood out to me and maybe ones that stand out to you. Apparently, his biggest song is the song that opens this record, Rock and Roll McDonald's. And he talks about McDonald's a lot in his music, which is interesting. There's another song, which one is it? I'm Sorry That I Got Fat, where he talks about eating McDonald's for like 5 years straight and saying he's trying to slim down. And this song is a reminder for me to slim down.
I'm going to pull up the track listing, so I'm with you. Yeah, I love this compilation because it does give you a really solid one or two examples of every type of song that Wesley did. And like you said, let's see, I'm looking for Greatest Hits Volume 1. Here we go. So yeah, it does open with Rock and Roll McDonald's, which was kind of his biggest track. And also because it was kind of like a non-profane song. So it was one that you got to remember, man, it was like those early years of web video, Homestar Runner, all those like flash videos. It was the first time that we could like watch kitschy media streaming in real time, or relatively good quality on our computers, right? So you kind of got inundated with that, with early viral videos and viral songs and silly songs. So Rock and Roll McDonald's fit into that genre really, really well. But you're right, there's something else going on there, which is he is expressing some shame and some guilt. He was a really big dude. He struggled with his weight. I think a big part of that was he was on antipsychotics, right? Which probably contributed to some pretty morbid weight gain. And so it's interesting. It seems like just a silly, kitschy song, but you're right. He's talking about feeling shame and guilt for eating McDonald's, and that other one, I'm Sorry I Got Fat.
I think I don't know exactly like how homeless he was, or like how on the streets he was, but I think probably that's what he could afford. That's what was near him that he could get and access easily. And I think there's a lot going on with McDonald's in his songs that maybe he didn't even realize.
I think so, man. The album also contains a couple of his songs where he would do entire albums that are kind of unlistenable, of just tributes to bands that he saw. So literally track 1, Smashing Pumpkins, and they follow kind of a repetitive, this band played at the Metro. There were about 3,500 people at the show. The show was awesome. It whipped the donkey's ass with the belt. Then he'd sing the name of the band. So there's a few of those on this album as well, right? Urge, Overkill, maybe Elvis Presley, although I doubt he saw Elvis Presley at the Metro in 1994.
Stabbing Westward, that's my favorite of those.
Stabbing Westward. So those are a tough listen because they don't have like as much humor value to them. There's no good profanity, and they're also a little less memorable because they are just extremely, extremely repetitive.
I kind of like, I do like those though, because it's like, it almost feels like what I'm doing here. It's like, I saw a thing that I liked, and now I'm going to tell you that it was cool. And
he's so positive in them. He never says like, I saw this band sucked. It's always this. I saw what's another big shit, Red Meat or something like that. He doesn't say 1,500. There were 1,500 people at the show. The band was awesome. And, it's great because it's all these different genres. Wesley clearly loves rock and roll, right? It'll be like metal bands and stuff. And he loves it. He goes on and on about, sometimes he'll say, I went backstage, I met the band. They were awesome. I love them like a magic kiss. That's a famous Wesley phrase. A magic kiss is like high praise,
Yeah, and then so you got that. There's a couple other songs in between, and then you get to the 4th track, Outburst, which is probably my favorite track on the record. A lot going on in that song. The backing track is really interesting too. It's like this spooky, jazzy country thing. It's got like these synthetic guitar sounds on it. It's a really kind of unsettling vibe just from the music bed that he's using. And then talking about how he had this episode in an art store.
And isn't that interesting? Because even though we were earlier not slagging Wesley, but we were saying, it's the keyboard accompaniment, while kitschy and humorous, leaves something to be desired in terms of like the musicality. But on this song, like you said, what does he do? He's using like I don't know if it's a minor chord patch or something, but it's like, it is darker minor chords. Like obviously Wesley got that to communicate this story about having a schizophrenic outburst in public. It's not it's not one of the happy tunes. He frames it with dramatic minor chords, and it's a bummer of a song. I mean, it was the kind of song that, as a 19-year-old we would chuckle at, we would laugh, but when you listen to it, it's Wesley communicating the pain of living with schizophrenia. He says a chronic outburst can happen. He's telling you what it's like to be him, and he knows that he's scared and shocked all these people around him by screaming and acting out based on what he was hearing in his head.
There's the line, I also said suck my dick in front of a lot of people, which, I mean, that's the line that if you're in college and you're listening to that, that's going to get the laugh.
Of course.
But
we would drag our Winamp thing right to, okay, wait, it's at 45 seconds that he says the thing about the suck my, you know what I mean?
And it still kind of makes me laugh. I still chuckle at that, but like, there's something like he is expressing, this horrible thing that happened to him.
I will say this, Jason, one of my favorite genres of Wesley's song, of which there aren't any on this album, he has a few about getting thrown out of church. So I recommend to viewers, if you search for Wesley Willis, They Threw Me Out of Church. And again, with the kind of repetitive, he has one called I Got Kicked Out of Church, They Threw Me Out of Church, Don't Curse in God's House. And they're all very similar stories about how he has an outburst in church. And the Reverend apparently calls Wesley out in front of the congregation and kicks him out of church for swearing in front of everybody.
I'll have to look up one of those as well after we finish
Highly
up
recommended.
Here.
Yeah.
There's also a couple of these ones that are like similar to the I Saw a Show and I Love This Band, where he's just like talking about people that he's come across. Aftab Nurani is the one where he's talking about his doctor that I thought was really sweet. You gave me a shot and you're calming me down. And
it's so sweet, man. He's immortalizing his friends. He's paying tribute. That's his birthday present or Christmas present to a friend. And he would do that. like he would do it on the spot. I remember he was on Howard Stern in the mid-90s, a similar thing where Howard clearly had him on as like a laughy sideshow kind of thing. But Wesley's interview is really lovely. And I think if I remember, he writes a Howard Stern song like that on the spot. And then he writes a Baba Booey song like that on the spot. And of course, it's the same exact chords in the background, but the chorus is Baba Booey. Yeah, that was his gift to the people in his life.
Yeah, I like in the Tammy Smith song, I love you like a milkshake. I thought that was a great line.
I love you like a milkshake. I love you like a magic kiss. You put me on a joyride, right, Wesley? When he would overcome his demons, he would say that he was on a joyride or a joy bus ride. And of course, in the moments where these demons, right, the voices were getting to him, he would say they were putting him on a hell ride. So a lot of Wesley's songs will mention how he goes down a dark path and he's on a hell ride, which is a incredibly poetic way to say what you're going through, man. You're stuck on this journey. It is a hell ride, you know?
Elvis Presley, that's another one where it's not exactly the same as like Stabbing Westward and Smashing Pumpkins, because it's not a firsthand experience, but he's talking about how he says he is my greatest singer.
Mm-hmm.
He's my kind of guy, he says. And then there's these like stacked, I don't know if they're pitched, these crazy harmonies
Yeah,
that are really wild. Yep. And I wonder where that comes from, if that's like sort of like voices that he's hearing, or if it's just like him attempting to make harmonies that he's heard.
I think in one of the documentaries, you have a great ear, I think he did specifically say that was emulating some of the things he would hear in his head. I remember he was clearly surrounded by very positive Chicago musicians. And I remember in one of the documentaries, it shows whatever recording engineer would bring Wesley in and probably for $5 let him record all day, would help him record a whole album songs in a whole day. Wesley would go to Kinko's and make his covers. He would borrow somebody's CD burner at the time and print up all of his albums. So he was pretty well connected, it seems, and people were very kind to him, man. That Chicago creative community was really supportive of the guy.
So then in the middle of this record, you've got a couple tracks where it suddenly breaks from the Technics keyboard, and you've got a couple of the, I guess, is this the Wesley Willis fiasco that we're hearing on this record?
Yep. Jello really wanted to show the world all these different facets of Wesley's musicality. So yeah, for a few years, Wesley he fronted like a hardcore band, and the recordings are amazing, right? I mean, it's great, big budget, full kind of hardcore stuff. And it works really well. My favorite of those is he's doing time in jail, right? Where Wesley recounts this amazing story of having a schizophrenic outburst on the bus, and a dude who witnesses it attacks Wesley. This was a real thing that actually did happen. That's another, the line is blurred between what is Wesley writing as fiction and what has actually happened to him. And reading interviews and stuff over the years, some of this stuff really did happen to him. And that's one of them, where a guy attacked him and cut him, probably because Wesley was being physically aggressive or freaking people out on the bus. And so that's probably my favorite of those songs. It's really, really interesting. He details, almost like a Carter family song, just the facts of what happened. At 5:17 p.m., I was on the Cottage Grove bus at the intersection of Loop and blah, blah, blah. I exited the Cottage Grove bus, and he says the guy's name and stuff too. He like uses his full name, the assailant. What better way to deal with such a traumatic thing than communicating it with your friends in your hardcore band?
Jesus is the Answer is a pretty wild one with the hardcore band, and the way it starts, I should have taken better notes, but he's basically it's like, I'm gonna whoop a donkey's ass favorite or something.
Yeah, well, one of them, is it Jesus is the Answer? One of them starts with maybe the best intro I've ever heard for a song. He says, I'm going to do this song again. Number 2, I'm going to do this song again up your ass. Number 3, I'm going to do this song again till I fuck you up like a car crash. I mean, he goes through this like detailed list of how intense this song is going to be. And then the band kicks in. again, I think intentionally humorous in some ways, right? But
It's
also just a great intro.
it's a great intro, and it's so aggressive that it's such a juxtaposition against what he's about to sing about. Jesus is the answer. So yeah, it's really funny.
Because he even wraps it up that way. He says, number 5, I'm going to fuck you up like an accident. And number 6, Jesus is the answer. And the band kicks in. Hey, man, it inspires me, you know?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty amazing. Then you got I Whooped Batman's Ass, which you've already alluded to, these fantastical songs. What's he say? Batman was annoying me, I think is why he whooped his ass.
Yeah, again, a whole series of songs that he would do about famous Marvel superheroes offending him, usually offending his girlfriend. I think in some of them, Wesley maybe projects that he's in a relationship, and Batman or Spider-Man will quote mess with my girlfriend, and so Wesley will step in and defend the girlfriend and beat the shit out of the Marvel superhero. I'd say I Whoop Batman's Ass is probably my favorite Wesley Willis song, and maybe like a top 50 song for me of all time. It's worth noting that Wesley, much like Bob Dylan, never really committed live to any of those arrangements. I think it's worth noting that whatever happened in the studio that day wasn't really something that Wesley was able to replicate. I don't know that he would always remember exactly whatever the pad was. So when I would see him live, he would do I Whooped Batman's Ass, and it kind of sounded nothing like that studio track. It'd be faster and a little more of a random, most of the words would be the same. But I mean, if Bob Dylan can do it, Wesley Willis can do it, you know?
I guess final thoughts, put a bow on defending Wesley Willis to maybe those that are skeptical of the validity of this.
Well, it is hard for me because I'm so nostalgic for it, right? I'm sure a lot of the people that you're talking to, that factors in hugely. There's nothing as powerful as nostalgia. So obviously, if all things being equal, if I didn't know about this and you handed it to me in 2023, I might be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is this? That said, I would say it's a really interesting record of like a beloved street performer. I don't know. Actually, I don't know that he was ever really homeless. That I think that might have been a myth. I do think when we say street performer, it's because he would perform on the street, but I don't think he was ever actually homeless. And yeah, I mean, to me, the value is it's a really unique, intentionally humorous in places record of 90s street performing, and a big mix of keyboard spoken word stuff, hardcore music, and above all, it's somebody's pretty unique perspective, man. There aren't many places that you're going to hear songs about the chicken cow, which Wesley would imagine. Another one that I love that isn't on this album is called "The Termites Ate My House Up," which is a great one. Wesley describes how termites come and eat his entire house to nothing, and the chorus is, the termites ate my house up. And he really commits to communicating how devastated he is by the termites eating his house up. So to me, it's super imaginative. It's no different from Syd Barrett or something. It's kind of psychedelic, these songs. And it really does fit into that whimsy that I love about music. To me, all music should take you back 10 or 20 years. I mean, all music to me is like a youthful thing. It makes you think of being a child. And Wesley really does that beautifully. He just does it with a lot of profanity. So make sure to hit that mute button if your mom is walking down the hall, towards your room.
Do you think there's any direct influence on your own music coming from Wesley Willis? I know people always want to draw like really direct comparisons when it comes to influences, like this directly influenced this. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's always how influence works. It kind of just, I don't think many artists think of it that directly. It just kind of exists. It's things you've heard and it just comes out how it comes out. But I wonder if you feel anything, similarities between Wesley Willis and your own music.
Yeah, I mean, Wesley he was one of the first performers that I saw that I thought of as being a national performer who at his shows, he was hanging out at a table, meeting everybody, doing drawings for people. He was obviously trying to sell stuff and make a couple bucks. But there were each time I saw him, there were several hundred people there. I don't know, 400. I saw him at the Bug Jar in Rochester, which probably is like a 300 or 400 person venue, and they were always packed. And his approach was he would just hang out. You could come over and meet him and shake his hand. Maybe we'll link in the description, but I have a YouTube video of my friends and I from Ithaca College meeting Wesley at one of his shows. And he would do this thing where he would almost like anoint you. He would headbutt you. He'd say rock, and he'd headbutt you. Say roll, and he'd headbutt you. And it was like his little ritual when he'd meet a new friend. Say rock, headbutt, say roll. And he was gone too soon, man. I guess that's probably the last thing we should say. I think he died of leukemia, I think, in 2000, maybe 3 or 4. So pretty shortly after getting into Wesley and then learning about him actually being a schizophrenic dude, right? And then he was gone pretty shortly thereafter, I think 2003. So I don't know how history looks back on him, but pretty influential in terms of the DIY side, hanging out, meeting people, giving a little incentive for people to come to your show. Oh, here's a drawing, right? The kind of stuff that we would definitely see with Kickstarter, right? And GoFundMe in the years to come.
For sure. Yeah. 40 years old in 2003. So yeah, thanks for coming on and doing this. Hopefully opens some people up to Wesley's music and hopefully your music as well. I hope people check out both. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Rate it. I don't even know how that works yet. I'm not up on Apple Podcasts yet, but I think you rate it and comment and stuff like that. So whatever you do that, and check out the next one, and we'll see you then.
Thank you for having me, man. Cheers. It was a blast.